Hey everybody, welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep 'em flying.
Good evening, airplane enthusiasts, and welcome to CAF Warbird Tube for tonight. We are glad to have you here. This is episode number 194. We're going to be talking with Derek Abbey, who's the president and CEO of Project Recover, and we're going to find out some of the things they've been up to in 2024 and what to look forward to in the coming year. And the future, we'll talk a little bit about the past, but also about the future of the organization as well. So whether you're a first-time, you're joining us for the first time, or you're a loyal Warbird Tube fan, we're glad to have you with us tonight. If you enjoy what you see tonight, please share it across your social media platforms. We do appreciate it, and also make sure that you subscribe to our channel, and also click that bell icon on YouTube so you'll get notifications when our new episodes are posted. Now, Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. To find out more about our events, our aircraft, local units, or how you can be a part of the fun, just visit our website, commemorativeairforce.org. Now, as you're watching tonight, maybe something that Derek and I are talking about triggers a question in your mind. Well, just put it in the chat box. We'll try to answer them either during the presentation or before we sign off tonight. So with that, Derek is joining us from Bend, Oregon, the east side of the mountains, the dry and fun side, as he said. A little snow on the ground out there in Bend?
It sure is. It's cold and there's a little bit of snow, but I love the snow and it's fun to play in. Looking forward to doing some more time on the mountain here soon. Good.
Well, Derek, let's take a look back at Project Recover. What was the origins of the organization itself? How did it get started?
Yeah, the organization has grassroots beginnings more than 3 decades ago when our founder, Dr. Pat Scannon, was on a separate mission in the nation of Palau in the South Pacific. They were actually looking for a Japanese trawler that had been sunk by a young ensign during World War II. His name was George Herbert Walker Bush, and he would go on to be the President of the United States, but back then he was a naval aviator fighting for our nation, and he had sunk this trawler, and in the early 90s there were some rumors going around that the trawler might not have been armed and some things like that. So a small team went looking for this trawler, and they actually found it relatively quickly. And they found it so quickly that after documenting it, they had some extra time, and Pat and his wife hired a guide and asked them to take them to more World War II stuff. And most people that go to Palau dive the beautiful waters there. It's one of the most amazing places in the world to do some scuba diving, but he was interested in this World War II stuff. And so one of the first places that guide took him and his wife to was to a wing in shallow water. And Pat recognized the wing relatively quickly as American and asked the guide, what happened to this aircraft and what happened to the crew? And the guide didn't have any answers. And Pat likes to describe that moment as an epiphany. And he, recognized it as American. And after looking at it some more, he recognized that it was a B-24 aircraft and started researching the losses that took place in and around Palau and realized that there were several losses and hundreds that remained missing. And so he started going back to Palau on his own. And shortly after that, spending some time in the jungles and the waters of Palau, realized that maybe this isn't the safest work to be doing by yourself. And so he started gathering some like-minded individuals to join him on these missions, and they would do one mission a year to the country of Palau. It was all self-funded, and the group was originally called the Bent Prop Project. And that's when I became a part of the organization, and that's our roots. And from then, it has grown to something really, I know, 20 years ago, none of us could imagine what we're doing today. I can't imagine what we'll be doing in 5 years, but happy to talk about, how things have changed over the years.
Yeah. Well, you've been with the organization 22 years now, right?
Yes. Yeah. 22 years. I can't believe it's been more than 2 decades.
So how did you get involved? What was, did you answer an ad in a newspaper? I mean, how does one get involved in this?
Well, it just so happened that I was in a Marine fighter squadron myself. I was an active duty Marine. I was based down in Marine Corps Air Station Miramar in San Diego, California. And I had just come back from a deployment to Iraq. OAF had just started. It was the beginning of 2003, and the F-18s were sent home relatively quickly at the beginning of that conflict. And I was in the ready room one day, the phone rang, and the duty officer answered it. And I happened to be the historical officer for the squadron. So he gave me the phone, and on the other end of the phone was a gentleman named George Burianic. And George was a member of my squadron during World War II. And he was just looking for information related to World War II veterans from the squadron, if we had any contact information related to any of those cadre. And we didn't. I said, we don't have any records around that, but why? Why do you need the information? He says, well, every year we have a World War II reunion and we gather in different places. This year we're gathering in Indiana, and we're just trying to get as many people as we can. And so I said, I don't have any of that information, but I would love to join you if I could. And he said, yes, please come out. And so I grabbed another guy, and we took a jet, and we flew to Indiana and landed and met with the old Marines, and they're like, this is amazing. Tell us about Iraq and F-18s. And we said, who cares about Iraq and F-18s? Tell us about World War II and Corsairs. And they said, who cares about World War II and Corsairs? And it was a bonding across time of these fellow Marines. And through that time, they said, you need to meet this guy, Pat Scannon. He comes to our reunions pretty much every year, and he gives us an update on the work that he's doing. He's going to Palau every year, and he's searching for these missing Americans from World War II, and he interviews the veterans to gather information, but then also updates us. Well, that year I had to get somewhere, and so we had to leave relatively early, and I missed Pat probably by 20 minutes. But in the process of meeting with the World War II cadre, I said, next year, why don't we have this reunion in San Diego, and we'll have the old squadron and the new squadron, and it'll be great to just have a gathering across time. And it was then that I met Pat, and Pat and I became fast friends. I was really interested in the work that he was doing, really fascinated by it. And through that process of us becoming friends, he asked me to be a part of the organization shortly after. And I didn't know what I would contribute or how I would support the mission, but it just seemed like the right thing to do. And if I could find a way to contribute, I was going to do so. And so I became a part of the organization. And it took me a while to go on my very first mission because I was deploying quite a bit back then, but I went on a couple more deployments to the Middle East and came back from one and unpacked a sea bag and packed a suitcase, and I met the team in Palau for our mission that year. And it was we had a discovery that year of an MIA in some very, very dense mangrove jungle, and it turns out it was a member of my squadron from World War II. And so that was my first time being a part of the organization, and even though it was such an incredible event for me to be a part of that mission specifically and a part of the organization, I never fathomed that, 2 decades later, we'd be sitting here talking about the work that we're doing and continue to do.
Yeah. What was you said you went on the mission. Was that your first hands-on experience with the organization, or you had done some things before you were deployed?
Well, I had been involved with the team and had been doing research and things like that with them and keeping track of everything and trying to go on missions. And my deployment schedule just at the time wasn't cooperating. And so it took me a while to go on my very first field mission. And back then we didn't have as many missions. We were doing one mission a year for about 4 weeks to Palau, and it was all self-funded. And so I finally was able to get back from that deployment, get some leave because I would take leave from my military service. And then I went on my very first mission. So yeah, it took a little bit after becoming a member to go on my very first mission, which surprisingly, or not surprisingly, maybe, is it happens still today. We get people that are interested in becoming members. They go through the long process, which is very different from when I became a member of the organization. And then since it is volunteer based, the timing of the mission doesn't always work, or the missions that we're sending out. So once they kind of are brought into the fold and go through all the process of becoming members, then they're in, and I'll reach out to them, or somebody will reach out to them every time we're building on a mission and try and include them. And there's no penalty for not being able to go on a mission because it is volunteer based, and we realize that life has a vote on when you can and can't go on these missions. So it's not unusual for somebody to be very involved for a while, and then life happens. Maybe they have a kid, maybe they get married, they get a new job or something, and they have to take a break for a while, and then they come back, or the other way around, they're not as involved as they want to be, and then life happens and changes, and then they become very involved. So we have some key volunteers that this is a very big part of their life, and others it's still a big part of their life, but they can't spend as much time with us as they want.
And that's very similar to the CAF and our touring aircraft. We were talking before we came on the air about the aircraft at Dallas, at the headquarters, B-29 Fifi and B-24 Diamond Lil, and they go out on tour, and you're right, there are some people who can devote a lot of time because they have vacation time or they're retired, whatever, and they can be on the tour, and others really want to be there, but they have to work or take care of the family or whatever. But it's amazing how, as time goes on, those schedules start to sync up. So if it's something you really, really want to do, somehow it works out. And I get the feeling that's the same with Project Recover.
It is. And, my role has changed over the years. I went from being a team member and then being a team lead and then a board member as a nonprofit grew, and now the president and CEO for 5.5 years. I would love to go on every single mission to the field with all the teams, but I got to take care of some other parts of the organization as well, which is really not the parts that most people want to be a part of, but it does really advance our mission, whether it's sexy or not. And as long as we're advancing the mission, I'm happy to be a part of it.
Good. Well, one of the things that you do is you help bring closure to the families, and that's by bringing some remains, some artifacts or something back to them. And we've got some photos of some of those in that have taken place recently. What was the first? Do you remember what the first repatriation was?
I remember the first one I was a part of.
Okay.
Believe it or not, it was a mission that I wasn't on, so I wasn't involved in locating the aircraft, but I was able to participate in the memorial and celebration. These are not only memorials because of the time that has passed and the circumstances of the loss and being missing. In many ways, these homecomings are also very much a celebration. And so I distinctly remember the first time I was able to play a part in showing my respects and being there. And it was actually Arlington National Cemetery for a B-24 crew that the team had located. And this was the final ceremony of the crew members that they had recovered. Multiple ceremonies had taken place across the country, and then the last to be buried was happening in Arlington National Cemetery. And Arlington is absolutely incredible in its own way. Each one of these ceremonies is incredible and special in its own way, but Arlington has this extra level of just being Arlington National Cemetery. And so it was I wish I could accurately put into words what it meant to be there and to just show respect to this family. But you saw all these people come out, to include this site was located in Palau. The president of Palau flew to the United States and attended this ceremony to show his respect. One of their high chiefs, so they have a tribal system as well as a political system that we are familiar with in the United States, but one of their high chiefs also traveled. They spoke at the memorials. They paid their respects to the families. And it was just absolutely incredible. I tell people that it's pretty intuitive how bringing somebody home to these families, how it's impactful for them, even though it's impactful in greater ways that many people can grasp. But it's just as life-changing for us as team members to go and simply sit in the back and watch and like I said, bear witness to this. Not very many things that you do in your life, you get to go and witness the actual impact that you're creating in these communities and these families and things like that. And Project Recover is one of those special organizations where you work really, really hard, and many times these families don't know that you're even working on these sites, and there's no guarantee you're going to have success. But when you do have success and you are able to locate those that are missing and ultimately play a part in bringing them home, it's pretty special. That's for sure. And it's really special to interact with these families and develop a bond with them and be with them as they go through this journey, especially on the backside of it.
Yeah. When you locate a site, a crash site, for instance, and you've got somewhat of an idea of who might be there, when do you actually contact the family? I mean, do you wait until you have like a positive identification?
Yeah, so things have changed in recent years, but our standing policy is we don't reach out to families. So that does change as the case moves along, but typically our policy as we're working on these cases is we don't actively reach out to the families. The reason that we have that policy in place is it mirrors the Department of Defense, and we don't want to create any false hope.
Right.
They've already suffered so much, and we can never make any promises, and we don't want them to get excited or too excited that we might find success and then we don't. So that's our standing policy. But with that, when a family reaches out to us, we don't keep anything from them either. So if somebody reaches out to us and we are working on that case, we will share that information with them. But there tends to be a specific point when we switch and we actively pursue the families. And that occurs after the identification has officially taken place. So when we as Project Recover are fully vertical as a non-government organization within the MIA space. And what that means is we do proactive research, search missions, documentation of sites, and recovery missions in both the underwater environment and the terrestrial environment. What we don't do is the official identification. That's restricted by Title 10 to the Department of Defense, and their Defense POW MIA accounting agency does that blindly in one of their labs in either Hawaii or Nebraska typically. And so we'll recover remains for the missions that we do excavations on and create that chain of custody to get those remains back to one of those labs, at which point they take over and they go through identifying that person blindly. And then once that is complete, they turn that case over to the branch of service of the individual, and a casualty affairs officer takes over. And the process is almost as if the person was killed in action the day before.
Right.
They're notified. They are provided all the information that they can. They work with them to appropriately memorialize their loved one however the family wants to. But once the identification is complete and public, then we do, if we don't have a relationship with the family, we go through the process to try to connect with them. And we do that for a couple reasons. One is every time we find an MIA site, we fold a flag for every single MIA on that site. We have a ceremony that we do around that. We record it. Many of our team members share messages for the family. And then we hold on to that flag and that recording to be delivered to the family in this case. And so we have that flag and we're going to deliver it to them however they want. So we want to connect with them around that. And then the second piece is we want to answer any questions that they might have.
Right.
They want to know everything. And the process now is very predictable because you can see the grieving process pick up where it had left off, even though some of these family members never had met this person, or some of them weren't even alive when they were lost. That grief has passed through the generations to these various family members. And so initially, they're kind of looking at us cockeyed and like waiting for some sort of scam to emerge, asking for money or something. We're after something. And once they realize that we're not doing that at all, we're only here to provide more, and they've already given enough where we would never ask them for anything. Well, then they kind of transition to the next stage, and that's they want to know everything. And we're happy to sit down and provide as much information as we can. And we've been honored to be kind of brought into the fold of the families and included in these very special moments, like I said, to come and bear witness and show our respects. And it's something that we cherish very much. It's the whole reason we do this work is for those families.
Yeah. And, as we're talking about it, World War II, it's, almost 80 years, depending on where you are in the war. So the people who, like you said, the people who had the direct connection with that veteran who was lost may be gone themselves, and we're maybe 2 generations down. But you said something about the grief, like sort of flowing through the family, and that's kind of an interesting thing. And can you just explore that a little more for me? I mean, it just doesn't seem, in some ways, it doesn't seem like it should necessarily flow through the family, but I guess maybe it does.
Oh, it absolutely does. And I've had the honor of interacting with thousands of family members now and seeing the impact that this has on those families. And so there is a scientific term around it, and there's research based on it. And we are looking to contribute to that research. And the term is ambiguous loss. And so the vast majority of us are familiar with losing somebody close to us. Tragically, it could be somebody that was lost in combat in the military. It could just be a loved one in your family or a friend that you're close with. And we know the trauma associated with that and how we deal with the grief of when somebody is lost. But when somebody goes missing, it's different. And that is called ambiguous loss. And so every single one of those families holds on to hope, no matter how slim, that their loved one somehow survived, that they have amnesia, they were rescued by natives, they're living another life somewhere, and someday they're going to come home. Someday they'll get their memory back and they'll remember where they're supposed to be, and they'll make their way home. And when somebody is lost, there's a couple things that happen when it's somebody that we're close to and we know what happened to them. We have a ceremony around it, typically, whatever your background and your culture is. We memorialize them in some way. But what happens as well that we don't necessarily talk about, we're kind of unconscious of, is a lot of role changing takes place. So that person filled this role and that role in the family unit, and now they're no longer here. So, the term you often hear is you're the man of the house now, or you're whatever, you're filling these roles. And but when somebody goes missing, because they're holding on to the hope that they're going to return, first, the grieving process is interrupted. It doesn't continue, it just stops and it's held, and that hope is held on to. And then role changing doesn't occur. And that's part of the grieving process as well. And so because it's interrupted, this person takes on this mythical status within the families. And we've been in many homes and you see it over and over. There's almost an altar set up for them. There's a photo of them, perhaps their medals are there or the telegram that they received. And so we've seen it over and over again where the family members that are around were born after these service members were lost and never met them firsthand. But you see the grieving process pick up. And again, first it's disbelief, and then it's like, oh, wow, this is real. Well, now we want to know everything. Now we know the truth. So the myth is no longer a myth. It's an actual hero. It's a person. And we know exactly what the story is and what happened with them, and we can appropriately memorialize them. I said we don't reach out to families, but hundreds of families reach out to us, if not thousands of families reach out to us every year. And most of the time, we don't have any information related to their loved ones, but we respond to every single one of them. And many times we are the first to confirm and acknowledge the loss of their loved one. It might have been 80 plus years ago, but all they ever had was a telegram. And grandma or grandpa or whomever, it was too painful to talk about, so they never talked about it. And just saying and acknowledging their loss is pretty significant for these families. And they tell us over and over again, where just knowing that somebody that has no connection to their family besides being fellow Americans is doing this work on their behalf is very comforting to them. And then obviously if you can provide more information, it's even more significant.
Parker was asked a question. First of all, I should thank you for all you and your organization does for veterans and closure for the families. But how much support do you receive from DOD and the VA in your work? I mean, obviously you said you get the recovery to a point where it's now ready for identification. DOD takes over, but are there other ways that you and the DOD and VA work together?
Yeah, well, first, we don't work with the VA. Okay. These individuals, unfortunately, never made it to veteran status. Okay. And the VA doesn't do anything related to those that are missing. I guess they do provide some of the funeral services for the families. Excuse me. But for our work, we work primarily with the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense has an agency called the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, DPAA. And they are responsible for the accounting for missing Americans. And there's actually a long story about how we work and haven't worked with the Department of Defense. So when we started this work, we would find these sites, we would document everything, and we would turn that information over to the Department of Defense. And it was a one-way conversation. We turned this over, no idea what would happen to the information, but many times they would take action on it because it was good information and they respected our research and activities. So it was a one-way conversation with the Department of Defense. But in 2015, the Department of Defense changed the structure of what is now DPAA. And through that process, they created the capacity to have public-private partnerships. And we were one of the first organizations that they reached out to. We were called the BEMPROP Project at the time, now we're Project Recover. And we created this formal relationship with DPAA. And so that relationship means, one, we can communicate better. There's more of a two-way street in our communication, but also it allows them to come to us and ask us to do any piece of that mission set that I outlined. It can be research, it could be a search mission, documentation of a site, or an excavation recovery of a site. And they'll pay us to do that. They'll contract us to do that, and we're happy to do it. But we also do our own unilateral work. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit charity. We raise funds for the organization, and we execute across that entire mission set on our own. And we do things a little bit different than the Department of Defense. We're a little bit smaller, a little more agile, but as a nonprofit as well, we'll build out cases. And right now our database has about 700 cases associated with 3,000 plus missing Americans. And that's actionable information. And so we'll prioritize those cases basically on highest likelihood of success. Do we have access to the area? Do we have the resources available? And we can execute missions around that. But what we also do, because we don't have all the resources that we want, is we do what we call campaigning. And so we'll go to countries and areas of the world where there's a number of losses. So we can go back to Palau or Italy or Chuk or Germany many times and maximize the resources when we're there. So we can work on multiple cases while we're there across the entire mission set, but also build a rapport with that nation that allows us to do our work more efficiently.
Yeah.
If we're doing a DoD mission, it's one piece of the mission set and that's it. Now we are working with them. It's getting better. The relationship's growing. They're responsive and they're working to make it better. And so we're working on how can we do a relationship where maybe we work on more missions while we're there, or a multi-year agreement or something like that. But it's growing. And people ask me all the time, well, shouldn't the Department of Defense just be doing this on their own? Why are you helping them? And to bring it back to the VA, I always compare it to, we have this massive VA that works with our veteran population, but also that's supplemented by more than 45,000 charities across our country to help with the military population. And I do want to draw it back because you brought up veterans. So I say that our work has an impact on individuals, families, communities, all the way up to the national level here in the United States. And it's actually paralleled in the countries that we work in. But that individual level has a big impact on our service members. So when you swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States and don the cloth of our nation, we, all of us as a collective Americans, make a promise to that individual and their family that should they fall in battle, we're going to bring them home. And that promise doesn't have an expiration date. But who is tasked with that promise when we send our youth to war? It's the individual service members to their left and right. And so when somebody is brought home and that promise is kept, it definitely has an impact at the individual level on the veteran community and the active duty military community. And I just wanted to make sure I acknowledge that. Our members are from all over the place, but as you can imagine, we are heavily weighted with veterans and first responders across the board. Many that have no military experience, but this mission does attract a lot of our former military. And I being one, I'm happy to be a part of it, of course.
Well, in your experience being active military and then having that connection to World War II and, just how that kind of all came together, really, that's the perfect illustration of what you're doing to try to close some of these chapters that are just open books. That, like you said, we have that obligation to bring everyone home, and it just is. It's amazing work. It's I'm sure very satisfying work, but yet. I'm sure as CEO, there's probably a lot of red tape and things that you need to cut through to help get your volunteers what they need to complete the mission.
Yeah, nobody wants to deal with the bureaucracy of anything, but for this mission, I'm happy to do so, and I'm happy to work with this incredible team. And yeah, it's as a former military member, veteran, it's very special. And we have many people on our team that were lucky enough to support this mission when they were on active duty. Not like me, where they were taking leave and doing it as part of Ben Prop Project or Project Recover. But we have some divers and others that were part of DPA teams, or previously they were called JPAC or SILHI. And they would augment their team with active duty service members from all over the world and send these teams. And you ask them across the board, they say, that was the thing I cherished most when I was on active duty, was being a part of this mission. And now you're saying I could continue to be a part of this mission now that I'm no longer wearing the uniform? It's like, absolutely. And so it's really neat to see the people that show up to do this work.
Yeah. The photo that we're looking at right now, where is this located?
Wow, that's a recovery mission, obviously an underwater site. So that actually is the site was a TBM Avenger with 3 sailors on it that were lost and missing for close to 80 years. That specific case is very, very special to us. That was, we located that site. It took a very, very long time, and we excavated that site multiple times. We did multiple recovery efforts on that site. And the first 2 aviators that were recovered were Anthony DePetta and Wilbur Mitz, and they were memorialized in 2023. In 2023, we also went back. Actually, when Anthony DePetta's memorial was taking place in New Jersey, we had a team on site that was doing the recovery for the last aviator, the pilot, whose name was Jay Manow. And we were able to recover his remains. In October 29th of last year, we had the memorial for Jay Manow in Kingwood, West Virginia. And so the last aviator from that Avenger, but it was very special because the next of kin for each of the families was a niece, and all 3 nieces attended the memorial in Kingwood, West Virginia. And it's the first time that those 3 families had come together since the crew was lost 80 years prior. So very, very special for us. It was in West Virginia, so they sang Country Road. He went to the University of West Virginia. So every time I hear that song, I don't know if you watched the Super Bowl, they played it during the Super Bowl. And for me, it has such a deep meaning. I was getting choked up watching the Super Bowl because of it. But very, very special case for us. I mean, they're all special, but that one has some pretty neat stories associated with it.
How do you find the leads to start looking? I mean, the ocean is very large, right? And we've kind of got an idea of where some of these crashes may have happened, but you need to zoom in a little closer than just it's over there, right? So how do you get that information?
Families will reach out to us, and hey, we had this information, and Uncle whomever was last seen heading west over the Pacific. It's like,
okay,
very big. And so I like to say that this work starts in the basement of an archive somewhere. And people see images like this in the field and they get really excited about that. But we wouldn't be able to do this work if we didn't have our full-time historian, Colin Colburn, doing research on this every single day. Families reaching out to us, doing interviews with locals. So it starts with building out a case in the archives, but we take information from all sources. So a family might reach out to us and say, I have this information. We'll take that information. We'll go to the archives. We will spend time in these countries and we'll interview locals, oftentimes like hunters and fishermen that know these areas very, very well. And we'll add all that information to the case. Earlier on in our work, especially related to World War II losses, we would do a lot of interviews with veterans. Unfortunately, and that's few and far between these days. But sometimes they have a footlocker in the attic or the basement or something that has some treasures in it, whether it's diaries or journals or things like that. So sometimes those families come forward. But we do take second and third hand accounts as well. And depending on the countries that we're working in, sometimes that oral history is very, very strong. And we build out a case as well as we can. And to your point, we try and narrow down that search area as small as we can using all the information that's available. And today, we're applying more and more technology to that search to help us with it, and it's helping a great deal. But ultimately, every single case, for the most part, starts in the basement of some archive somewhere, gathering information and just slowly building out that case.
I know that we've sort of, in our discussions, talked about kind of focusing in on World War II, and that's really where the bulk of the MIAs are. But you've also expanded and gone beyond just World War II in your searches as well. Yeah.
So today there's more than 81,000 Americans that are designated missing in action. And of that 81,000, 72,000 of them are from World War II, 7,000 from Korea, now less than 1,600 from Vietnam and the surrounding countries. And then a smattering here and there related to Desert Storm or the Cold War or others. And we've done work, World War II, we've done Vietnam, we've done Desert Storm, we've done missions in Kuwait. But what's not included in that 81,000 is as many as 20,000 American service members that are missing from training accidents off of our coasts, in our Great Lakes, and our mountains. And they're not necessarily designated missing in action because it wasn't directly associated with a conflict. And because that MIA designation, or lack of it, the Department of Defense is restricted by their charter to not put forth efforts to search for them. Now, that might be changing. There's legislation that's working to change that, but we're not restricted by that charter. And those individuals are just as missing to their loved ones as somebody that was lost in combat. And so we also search for training losses, and we're putting forth efforts to find those that are missing from training. Now, the research is more difficult. Those cases are not as well documented as a combat loss, but that doesn't stop us. We work to build out those cases as well as we can. And I was telling you, CAF having their headquarters down in Texas, there's a case that we're working on right now in the Gulf of Mexico associated with the B-52 that was lost in a training accident. 8 air crew on board, all 8 were married, all 8 had children. They were lost in 1968, Cold War loss. So we're doing what we can to locate that site and hopefully recover those service members and get them back to their families as well.
About how many missions do you do per year?
Great question. So we went from 1 mission a year, all self-funded when I started this work, and that's changed a lot. Now we are multiple missions a year all over the world. We've been to 24 different countries and growing. Last year we did 15 missions. And we are working to continue to scale that effort. So my goal is to get to 30 missions a year, which is pretty lofty. But we're not scaling for scaling's sake. We are scaling because time is not our friend. And every day that passes, more erosion takes place on these sites, more human development occurs around the world. And depending on where that occurs, we may or may not find those sites if they're disturbed. And so, COVID, we took a hit in the stomach like everybody else. And as an international organization, we weren't able to work internationally. But we weren't sitting on our hands. We continued our research. And what I did in leading the organization was really assess our model and how we were going about business, and did some tweaks to that to make sure that we created a system that would allow us to scale and do more. And so our model, our team model is we can modulate it. We have a core of people, typically a team lead, an archaeologist, a medical expert, forensic anthropologist, and then from there we build it out depending on the expertise that's needed. And we've grown our volunteer numbers and the number of experts that we have in various areas so that we can build multiple teams and send multiple teams to different corners of the world at the same time to do missions in parallel. And we've tested that. It's worked. We've scaled pretty significantly in the last few years. Our only restriction is resources, like so many others. So as more resources come on board, and they are, we'll continue to send out more teams each year.
One of the things, and we're looking at the photo here of flag draped casket, knowing that it's 75, 80 years, what what are you actually able to recover from a site, given the time and conditions?
That's not an unusual question, because I still get asked, about POW camps and whether we're taking off into the jungle like Rambo to raid these camps. And that's not the case. And every time I do a larger presentation to the public, I get a couple people that come up and ask me about certain cases or rumors and things like that. We have no cases that we have been able to confirm where service members were marched into another country and remain prisoners somewhere else, or they're alive anywhere. Everybody that we are looking for is deceased. And so even though it might have been 8 decades since they were lost, we can still recover remains. And so typically what we are recovering is osseous material or skeletal remains. And in addition to that, the only thing that we recover is personal effects or anything that might be able to assist with an identification. So that could be, obvious things like dog tags, but also rings or wallets or watches. Sometimes if it's a multi-crew aircraft, we might collect or definitely document life-saving gear and things like that might be associated with an individual or a specific position in the aircraft. But anything related to the aircraft or anything else is left. And so we recover the osseous material and any artifacts that can assist with the identification. And once we do that, a chain of custody is immediately established. And through the host nation, those remains are transported back to one of the labs, either in Hawaii or in Nebraska. And the Department of Defense will go through the identification process blindly from there.
How has it been working with foreign governments? I mean, I'm sure that it varies depending on the country, but also given the long history of Project Recover, I would think maybe not the red carpet is rolled out, but at least the doors aren't locked.
No, the doors definitely aren't locked. Initially, if we're working in a country for the first time, they might cock their head at us and look at us odd, like, where do you want to go? And what do you want to do? But once they realize that we're not looking for gold or treasure or something like that, that we're looking for people, very quickly what occurs is a values overlap. I don't care where you're working, what the culture is. Every single country that we've been to, there's some sort of value in recovering your loved ones when they're lost. So Palau, this photo right here is from Palau. Several islands, hundreds of islands in Palau, and they have a tradition that when you pass away, you return to the island of where your mother's from, and that's where you're celebrated, memorialized, and buried. And so once that values overlap occurs, this mission very much becomes their mission. And we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without the support of the host nation. And so, there's always bureaucracy in these countries, and it's different in every single country that we go to. But that's the necessary evil that we have to deal with, and we go through those processes appropriately. But they work with us very, very well, and we wouldn't be able to do the work without their support. And you can think of, countries where geopolitically it just doesn't make sense for us to go right now. North Korea is a big one. We just don't have access to that part of the world, even though there's a number of losses there, and other places that are a little bit difficult, in which case, we just put our efforts in other places where we expect that we can find success, and hope that, maybe the time will come where those relationships will change and we'll be able to access those areas. We're working with many, many former enemies, so there's no reason to think that might not change.
Well, again, the track record and the mission, each completed mission that you have just adds to the credibility of the organization. And it may take some time, but hopefully, some of those bridges can be built.
Well, this work is not a sprint. That is for sure. If you are somebody that is in need of immediate gratification, this is not work for you. Right. This is definitely a long road marathon, if you will, and our team knows that. We never promise and guarantee that any field mission will have success, and many times they don't have the success that we kind of associate with, to use a football analogy, scoring that touchdown. Mm-hmm. But they're never a failure. We are always gathering information. We looked in this spot, we didn't find it. Well, now we know that that's not the spot to look. And so we're going to look somewhere else next time, or we're going to apply ourselves in a different way. But it's never a failure. We're always creating and gathering more and more data that helps us advance this mission.
Looking at this photo, obviously a little high tech, and things have changed over the last 30 years compared to, I'm sure, the very first mission and the equipment that was used compared to what you have at your disposal today. What are just maybe some of the big advances that have helped move your research along?
Yeah, I'll start with the water environment. When I started this, it was basic scuba. We were, coming up with grids and searching underwater and using that quote unquote technology. If we were still doing that, we wouldn't really have made much of the progress that we've made. But one of the first things that really helped, actually, I'll go back even further. Believe it or not, one of the first things that really launched us into the future was Google Maps. When Google came with that, GPS technology was expanding. That was great. But now we can map out everything on this, record everything on this map and see it all in one spot. That was huge. But then the next massive step was automated underwater vehicles. So we started partnering with Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the University of Delaware that we could use those torpedo-like robots to basically mow the lawn and map the ocean floor. Now, instead of diving and working a grid underwater, now we're diving points of interest or sending a robot down to look at a point of interest and very quickly determining, is it man-made or not? Is it an airplane? Is it the airplane that we're looking for? Okay, now we can investigate it far more quickly, far more safe. And 10 years ago, we were excited because we could, a little bit more than 10 years ago, we were excited because we could cover 20 square kilometers in 4 weeks, and the resolution was about a meter. Today, we're doing about 100 square kilometers in the same amount of time, and the resolution is down to a centimeter. And to give you an example of that is I was up in Maine on a mission, and we were looking at the footage, and you could see the lobster traps on the ocean floor and the lines going to the surface. Now, what's kind of neat is that technology now is being utilized to recover lost lobster and crab traps that are devastating the environment and the fishing community. So now they can recover those traps that are killing all the sea life and have a positive impact on the price of crab or lobster, if you will, and better for the environment, all sorts of positive things. So that's really cool. Now, this photo specifically, this is on an underwater excavation, and those my colleagues, Nick there in the front and Orlando in the back. When we started doing underwater recovery, we really started developing that process during COVID. And if there was a silver lining to COVID, it was that we spent so much time coming up with our protocols and approach of how we would execute underwater excavation. And a lot of people will say, well, you just use, different gases, you do some tech diving or maybe a rebreather and this and the other. And so we started asking around and said, well, is this how you should approach this mission? And the right people were saying, that's not how you do this mission. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when a catastrophe will take place. And so then we started asking, well, how do you execute this mission? They said the only way you can do it is safely is with surface supply oxygen and utilizing divers that have salvage capability. Now, we're not salvaging these aircraft, but these divers are down below 100 feet moving big chunks of metal around underwater and using these big hoses to excavate or picking up big chunks of metal and putting it in a basket like this diver is doing right here in a very silty environment. Like you can see, the visibility isn't as good as it looks in this photo. And so we needed commercial level salvage divers. In that previous slide, Nick, who I mentioned, that's his company, Legion Undersea Services. So they're one of our partners. He was a Navy diver. And before he got out of the Navy and was running this organization, he worked on one of the sites that we located, that B-24 I mentioned about the memorial I went to. He did that as an active duty sailor, and now he's doing it, running his own organization. And Legion Undersea Services is another partner that we're working with to advance our efforts underwater. And And I truly believe that in working with them, we have become the gold standard when it comes to non-DoD underwater recovery and excavation. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Now, more technology continues to show its head, believe it or not, on land. The best thing we have right now is the boots on your feet, the machete in your hand, and an old school compass in your hand, the other hand, because GPSs will get blocked out by a really thick canopy, and you don't want to get lost in some of the places that we're at. So now we're working with some folks at the University of Georgia to help expand our technology on land, and that's taken us into all sorts of different directions, from multispectral analysis of vegetation to determine if the vegetation has been compromised by fuel from a crash or something like that, environmental DNA through soil samples, all sorts of drone technology. But even though the drone technology has really advanced underwater, and it is helping us in different ways, as far as this mission on the land side, it's definitely lagging behind what we've developed underwater. But now we're really focused on advancing that and helping advance our efforts related to land losses and infantry losses. As you can imagine, it's a lot easier to find an airplane that's been missing for 80 years than it is to find an individual. But we're not just resting on that. We're going to continue to look for these aviation sites, but we continue to look for prisoners of war, execution sites, infantry losses, anything like that. And so we did do an excavation last year of a land loss based on just witness accounts and families that came forward, and we were able to do that successfully. So we're just looking to continue to keep that growth mindset and then learn every single year and advance our mission through that learning and becoming more and more capable. And it's pretty amazing. I mean, you asked Pat, our founder from 30 plus years ago, he's still very involved, or my involvement over two decades, or anybody that's been around for a little while. I always say, I don't know what we're going to be doing in 5 or 10 years, because I couldn't tell you 5 or 10 years ago what we're doing today, and I'm just amazed by it. So I'm really excited for what the future holds and how it's going to help us advance this. But then it's really neat, because then that technology is used to help people in other ways, like I mentioned, kind of the fishing side of things, where we're collecting these traps now. So if it's put to good use in other places, even better.
Good. In the 30 years that the organization has been around, is there a count of the number of missing servicemen that you've been able to either recover or identify?
Yeah, the good news is that number is increasing and more rapidly every year. And so last year our efforts resulted in 7 identifications, but overall, Project Recover has been, we have documented or located sites associated with more than 300 missing Americans. And of that 300, 70 have been declared buried at sea. And what they mean by that is the assumption is that they will not be disturbed by recreational divers or others. So they'll rest where they lie in accordance with naval tradition. 24 have been repatriated and identified, and the remainder of that number are in some sort of open status, meaning the recovery's been executed and remains are going through the identification process now, or we need to execute a recovery. And cases like that, believe it or not, are like some deep water cases. So one of our more recent recoveries, we located a site in Papua New Guinea. It was B-24 with 11 souls on board. And it was a little too deep for us to do the recovery on. And so the Navy Experimental Dive Unit came in and did the recovery. And they were able to go down and live on the ocean floor using saturation diving. So they spent 2 separate 2-week periods on the ocean floor recovering on that site. And then they still need to do some more work on that, but some of those aviators have already been identified. And that, at the time, that was the deepest underwater recovery of MIAs to date. Now, we have located 5 other B-24s in a different part of the world that we believe all the crews are on them, so more than 50 Americans. But that was perfect in our mind because it was the proof of concept. The Navy can do this mission at depth. Now, we're keeping them current on a very real-world mission. And so our hope is that now we can get those guys to these other sites and keep them busy with plenty of work to do is our goal. And so we're locating sites now down to deeper than 1,000 feet. And 10 years ago, if it was lower than 100 feet, we weren't even paying attention to it. But now we're just, we just keep on going deeper and deeper and say, if we find them, our expectation is that technology will eventually catch up and we'll be able to do the recovery as well.
How many missions do you have going on right now, today?
We have a research mission going on actively right now, and we're sending a team out. Well, we have an individual leaving next week, and then the rest of the team is following the week after, and they're working on 2 separate missions. And then, we're kind of coming out of the winter months when we're a little less busy, and then it takes off through the rest of the year, and then we'll be busy throughout the whole year.
So do you have any goals in mind for this year that you'd like to accomplish with the organization? Well,
most of my goals are, they tend to be kind of technical business related type of things. But ultimately what that boils down to is I want to do more missions. I want to do more missions so we can bring more people home. It's not about having a bigger organization. And it's almost a little sad because many nonprofits, they scale because they think bigger is better, and that's not always the case. And we are scaling, but like I said earlier, we're not scaling for scaling's sake. We're scaling because time's not our friend. And so the team is working really, really hard to bring in more resources so that we can send more teams to the field, so that we can find more sites and bring more people home and provide more answers to more families. So that's our goal. And I look at that as more missions in the field is going to result in all those numbers going up. And so for my role, I can't go on every mission, although I would love to do that, but that doesn't keep the organization afloat, unfortunately. So I got to do the business side of things, and as well, although I will be in the field a couple times. So yeah, that's all I'm working on, and the team is working on the business side, is to generate more relationships so that we can generate more revenue into the organization and result in more teams in the field. And so we sent 15 missions out last year. Our intention is to exceed that this year and continue to grow to sending 30 missions a year in the coming years, and knowing that that's going to result in a lot more people coming home and a lot more families with answers. Some other kind of little things are bringing more visibility to the organization. So being on podcasts like this and shows like this, does that. And it's not just to advance the mission, it's also educating the community, letting them know how many people are missing, how many people are working to bring them home, to keep these stories alive as well. So we have a whole education program for youth where we go into the communities and we work with this youth, and we use this mission as a backdrop to say, this is an interdisciplinary mission, and we wouldn't be able to accomplish it without every single piece of this puzzle. You remove one piece, it's not going to happen. So how do we work as a team together to accomplish something that almost seems impossible? And we use aviation as a backdrop and history as a backdrop. So it's really engaging. It's multidiscipline for the students as well. We bring in old warbirds and things like that, so we can talk about, cases like you said, like, hey, we were looking for this Avenger. We found it. Here are the people. They're home now. Here are their families. And then we walk out and here's an Avenger. This is what they were flying, at the time. And the students love it. But even more importantly, the teachers love it, which means they'll continue to bring students back. And so we're consistently, it's called Skyward Bound. We're growing our Skyward Bound education program. My doctor, I've had second and third and fourth opinions, but every one of them says I'm getting older. And I'm trying not to, but it still happens. And so eventually somebody's going to have to take my shoes and every other shoes of other team members. And so we're hoping that, through that, we also inspire the next generation to honor this promise and put forth the initiative to keep it. So.
Good. If someone would like to volunteer for a mission, and whether that would be a mission in the field or doing research, some of the background things that you need done, like you said, it's a very intricate puzzle. You take one piece out and it doesn't work. So there's so many things to do. But how can somebody get in touch with the organization and volunteer their time?
You have it right there. Everything can be done through our website, projectrecover.org. Some people like to add a Y. Don't add a Y. It's projectrecover.org. Recovery. We do recovery, but the organization is Recover. But projectrecover.org, people can go there. If you're a family member and you have information, we'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in being a team member, we'd love to hear from you. We've started ambassador programs too. So people that just want to share this work in their communities, maybe they can't go to the field, but they can go to different events and talk about Project Recover. We'd love that. We'd love people to spread the word. And then, of course, as a charity, we want people to support it like every other charity. But all of that can be done at projectrecover.org. The big thing I ask is we are a volunteer-based organization, and the few people we have on staff is exactly that. It's a few. So I just ask for patience. Our application process for membership is very long, and it's intentionally long to make sure that we get the right people. We're going to send you to the other side of the world. We want to make sure the right person, you're going to fit well with the team and help us advance this mission. But once you're through the processes, it's absolutely worth it, and you're forever a team member. So yeah, you can do all that through our website, and we welcome hearing from anybody that has any information related to any of these losses, and of course anybody that wants to help us advance the mission.
Great. Just a minute or so left. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Boy, we covered quite a bit, Steve.
We did. Yes.
I think my typical wrap up, you already touched on it. I just want to thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure to connect with CAF again. It's always nice to work with you guys, and I'm hoping I have a little bit of extra time when I'm down in Texas next week that I can swing by headquarters and check out some things and spend some time in the hangar.
Sounds good. Derek, appreciate you taking time out tonight to share the progress of Project Recover, and we'll look forward to following your exploits and your recoveries as the year 2025 goes on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And thank you for joining us tonight. We'd like to hear your thoughts on tonight's episode or any ideas you might have for a future topic. Just drop us a line at media@cafhq.org. As I said in the beginning, if you like what you see on the show, please share it across your social media platforms. It helps get the word out, and we'd love to have more subscribers to our YouTube channel. If you've already subscribed, great. Thank you for that. Otherwise, click that subscribe button and also click the bell icon so you get notifications when our new episodes are live on YouTube. So that will do it for tonight. Until next time, appreciate you being here. I'm Steve Buss for the Commemorative Air Force. Have a great night.